Hi, welcome back to this Friday edition of Focal Point on AFR Talk. Great to have you in the conversation. 888-589-8840 is the number to call if you want to join in the conversation. We'll talk about anything that you want to talk about. A couple of things that I want to touch on. Dick Durbin is out there today. Let me see if I can find that story. Where did I put that? Dick Durbin's out there today supporting a same-sex marriage law in the state of Illinois. Now, the good news is apparently the Democrats in the Illinois Senate are going to pull this thing because they don't have the votes. It got out of a Senate committee, but they don't have the votes on the floor of the Illinois. This is about the bluest state you can find, and apparently they don't have the votes on the floor of the Illinois Senate to actually pass this thing into law, so it has been pulled. But Dick Durbin, senator from Illinois, is out there saying, sending a letter to the legislature in Illinois, urging them to support this thing. And he says this: I believe those whom God has brought to this earth with a different sexual orientation. And then he goes on with other things. But the important thing is Dick Durbin is saying God has brought these people to earth with a different sexual orientation. Now, this is way past the genetic causation idea. Now he's laying this off on God. God. It wasn't genetics that made people this way. It wasn't that they were born this way because of nature. They were born this way because God sent them here in order to be of a different sexual orientation. You know, it's one of the things that strikes me is, where is the separation of church and state? I mean, when we start talking about God, we start talking about creation, start talking about God's intention for humanity, they scream separation of church and state. You can't talk about that when you're talking about legislation. You can't talk about God in the halls of Congress or the state legislatures. You can't bring God and the scriptures into it. But when it suits their purposes, they apparently feel free to trash that mythical wall of separation of church and state. But notice that what Durbin does is he completely denies the concept that man is a free moral agent. This is the heart and soul of a biblical worldview. We are moral free agents. We can make sexual choices. We do not have to respond to every sexual impulse that comes along. Not every sexual impulse that we experience is a good one. In fact, a lot of the sexual impulses that we experience will take us in a direction that we know is going to hurt us and hurt people we love if we yield to them, if we follow them. And so we learn to resist, we learn to overcome. Same exact thing is true, but there's no part of that with homosexual impulses, but there's no room for that in Dick Durbin's fevered imagination. It's all God's fault, and apparently he sees people as helpless victims of their own impulses. Now, Paul Ryan did something very dangerous today, and I want to play a soundbite for you first of all. Yeah, Paul Ryan is talking here about the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, ENDA for short. Now, that sounds good. The Employment Non-Discrimination Act. It says you cannot discriminate against anybody in the workplace on the basis of sexual orientation. Now, that sounds fine. And you're going to hear Paul Ryan says he's a big-time supporter of it. We're going to listen to Paul Ryan say, this guy wants to be our president, ladies and gentlemen. He wants to be the standard bearer of the Republican Party. And he supported this thing, as you'll hear him say back in 2007. We'll listen to Paul Ryan, and I want to come back and explain to you why this is a big problem. Let's listen.
One of the things that might be coming up is the Employee Non-Discrimination Act.
Oh, and I voted for that before.
You think that the GOP should embrace this as, you know...
My position is very clear on ENDA.
Why do you think that the Republican Party is not coalescing?
Oh, I think there are Republicans who support ENDA. I was one of them.
But it's not, you know...
I don't know the answer to the question about...
Thank you, Congressman.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's Paul Ryan says, my conscience is completely clear in supporting ENDA. Now, again, this is superficial thinking on Paul Ryan's part. It is thoughtless. There are consequences to this that Paul Ryan apparently is not thinking of. Now, these are not consequences that Paul Ryan would intend, but they are clearly consequences that the homosexual lobby intends, because they know that a bill like ENDA, which enshrines sexual orientation, and again, sexual orientation is not defined, so it could be homosexuality, it could be lesbianism, it could be transgenderism, you name it. We're heading toward pedophilia and bestiality. That's where we're going with this thing. And what would happen then is, if you're a values-driven business owner, you're an employee or employer, say you run a Christian bookstore, And so you have a certain set of values that you want your employees to reflect. They're the ones that are going to be the face of your company. Doesn't matter. It could be Hobby Lobby. It could be Chick-fil-A. Could be any business that's run by Christians who have a concern about the values and the lifestyles of the people that represent the company. And what happens? You're running a Christian bookstore, just for sake of illustration, and this ENDA goes into effect, which says you cannot discriminate against anybody on the basis of sexual orientation. Now, what the homosexual lobby will do, and you may think this is bizarre, but they will do it. They will absolutely do this thing. Once this goes into effect, which says that no business can discriminate against anybody, no matter how bizarre their sexual perversity is, their sexual deviancy is, no matter how abnormal their sexual orientation is, you cannot take that into account when you make personnel decisions, hiring and firing decisions. So Christian Bookstore advertises in the classifieds. We have job openings. We have job vacancies. Come on in, apply for a job. What will the homosexual lobby do? They will send a flaming homosexual into that Christian bookstore to apply for a job. They'll send a guy in there wearing stilettos, a dress, and dangly earrings, and dare the owner of that Christian bookstore not to hire him. Because what happens if the Christian employer doesn't hire him, says, no, I don't think we're going to go your direction. We're going to go a different direction. We're going to hire somebody else. Now, even if he may have a perfectly legitimate reason from a business standpoint, maybe the person is not qualified for the job, that's not going to matter, because that prospective employee is going to insist that he or she was not hired because of sexual orientation. They will take that Christian bookstore owner to court and sue him for every dollar and dime he has to his name. And that will happen over and over and over again. So Paul Ryan, to me, this is dangerously naive on his part not to realize the incredible risk this is putting every values-driven employer in the country. ENDA is a bad, bad, bad idea, and nobody who wants to carry the Republican banner ought to support it. Now, shifting gears just a little bit.